Hey, it's Sila Social Studies.
Hey guys, and what's going on? Welcome back to Sila Social Studies. Today we're going to be covering the first installment of the Great War, otherwise known as World War I. So you have to remember, at the turn of the century, at the 1900s, the United States is smack dab in a progressive era, and they are starting to imperialize. They're starting to spread their American wings and imperialize other nations around the world. And it is this imperialization, not only just American imperialization, but really European imperialization, which really helps lead to the Great War. So here's a fun fact about World War I. For over 20 years, World War I was not even called World War I. Was it a lack of respect of this war? Not at all. In fact, the war was so devastating and it destroyed so much land and killed so many people that it was actually had the name of the war to end all wars, or the Great War, or even just the World War. It kind of makes sense, right? World War I could not be World War I without World War II. So now that we know how the Great War got its name, from now on we're just going to be calling it World War I. In the United States, the years leading up to World War I was fraught with industrialization and urbanization. America was making products at rates never seen before in history, and it was looking outwards for new markets to make more money. In the early 1900s, it saw the United States flexing its imperialistic muscles, annexing multiple territories, spreading American democracy abroad. However, a third round of European immigration was in full force in America, creating another generation of xenophobes and nativists, leading some Americans to thirst for isolationism. The United States was about to see that other nations were having some of the same desires. So when we discuss the causes of World War I, we're going to be touching on the culminating factors that led up to the war. We will talk about the spark that lit the fire towards the end of this video. But the causes that we're going to be talking about can easily be remembered by the acronym MAIN, M-A-I-N. So now that I just informed you about the acronym MAIN, how it would be an easy way to remember the underlying causes of World War I, the first letter M stands for militarism. This means that prior to the war, European nations were aggressively amassing huge amounts of armies for security. They were bulking up their armies to defend themselves from other nations who were also imperializing other nations, and they were signing secret treaties. It was human nature that once these armies were built, they should be used. So countries raced to create massive armies and align themselves with other nations. This leads us to the second letter, and that is A, and that stands for alliances. An alliance, by definition, is a relationship among people, groups, or states that have joined together for mutual benefit or to achieve some common purpose. When you make an alliance, they become your ally. These alliances stemmed from the aforementioned secret treaties that were pitting one nation against another. The third letter is I, and this I stands for imperialism, and that is when one country extends its powers and influence over another country or territory. Europe has traditionally been a conglomeration of countries that competed to develop vast empires and conquer other territories, and it's this competition that led to high tension and conflicts overseas and in Europe itself. An example of imperialism that relates to the war is that Germany took over the Alsace-Lorraine region from France, and France wanted it back. So the combination of militarism, alliances, imperialism all lead up to the last cause, nationalism. Nationalism is an intense love for your country, a strong sense of pride and loyalty to one's culture, and believing that, yes, where, number one, if a small country shares multiple cultures like Austria-Hungary, then there are possibilities that the nation will impede its own success. An example that is related to World War I is that the Slavic people wanted to break from Austria-Hungary and join the independent Slavic nation of Serbia. So now that we covered the main causes of World War I, let's quickly cover the combatants of World War I. Now, World War I was fought between 1914 and 1918, and it was fought between two major alliances of countries named the Allied and the Central Powers. Three of the four major Allied powers were originally named the Triple Entente and consisted of Britain, France, and Russia. Russia had been allies with Serbia when German allies Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia. Germany expected Russia to declare war on them, but in turn, Germany declared war on Russia on July 31st, 1914. France was preparing for war when Germany and Russia went to war, and a few days later, on August 3rd, 1914, Germany declared war on France. Britain declared war on Germany on August 4th, 1914, after Germany invaded their ally Belgium. Most of the fighting on the Western Front of the war was fought in France and Belgium between the British, French, and German armies. On the Eastern Front, Vladimir Lenin led the Bolsheviks over Tsar Nicholas II of the Romanov family in the Russian Revolution and signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, effectively ending Russia's involvement in the war. The last members of the Allied powers were the latecomers to the war and the ones that arguably made the biggest difference, the United States of America. The U.S. tried to remain neutral at the beginning of the war, since it was a war of European affairs, but declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917. Roughly 4.3 million troops were mobilized, and nearly 116,000 were killed in action. On the other side of the battlefield were the Central Powers, otherwise known as the Triple Alliance. The Central Powers began as an alliance between Austria-Hungary and Germany, with Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire joining later to form the Quadruple Alliance. It is not a historical secret that Germany has had political problems, driving them to become the bad guys of the early and middle 20th century. Germany by far had the largest army and was the leader of the alliance. Their attack plan was named the Schlieffen Plan, and it resembled their Blitzkrieg plan, or lightning war, of the Second World War. Germany aimed for a quick takeover of France and Western Europe so they can concentrate their forces on the Eastern Front against Russia. Austria-Hungary probably had the biggest impact on the start of the war when their Archduke was assassinated and blamed Serbia. Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia, starting off a chain of events, but we will discuss that in a second. The last two countries that joined the Central Powers was the Ottoman Empire, who had strong economic ties with Germany, and Bulgaria, who wanted to invade Serbia because of a land dispute. So now that we've discussed the underlying causes of the war and the participants, now we need to discuss the spark that ignited the war. In the early 1900s, because of Maine, M-A-I-N, distrust grew among European nations, and in 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed or took over Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Slavic people who lived there revolted because they wanted to be a part of Serbia. Fighting went on for years, and many anti-governmental groups like the Black Hand formed that would later wreak havoc to the world. On June 28, 1914, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, was traveling in a motorcade through Sarajevo, which is the capital and largest city in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with his wife and members of the government. A group of roughly 7 Serb nationalists belonging to the Black Hand plotted to kill the Archduke by using bombs and pistols. The Serbs lined the streets far from one another, hoping to give them the best chance to carry out their plan. The first two members neglected to act when the third threw a bomb at the car that the Archduke was traveling in, but it bounced off the car, blowing up in the street. The vehicle sped from the scene to a location where the Archduke was to give a speech. Franz Ferdinand gave the speech and wanted to travel back and speak with the people that were injured in the explosion. When the driver of the car made a wrong turn, there standing in the street was Serb nationalist Gavrilo Princip. When the car stopped to reverse, Princip ran to the car and shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife at point-blank range, killing them both. It was this assassination of Archduke Ferdinand that was the spark that ignited the war. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia in 1914, thus starting the Great War. All right, we're going to move on to our next section in just a few seconds. I'll see you next time.